What's up, Warriors, and welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Movement Podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. Today's special guest is a men's mental health advocate. She is also a men's coach. She helps men guide their lives and how to focus on their problem areas. And, just it's nice to have women in this line of work because, as you guys know, being a man, for all my listeners who are guys, it's hard for us to talk about this kind of stuff. And during Men's Mental Health Month, I wanted to specifically get Elise on here to talk about some talking points here. So help me welcome Elisa Micheals. Elisa, how are you?
I'm doing amazing. I'm so happy to be here.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you so much again for coming on here. It means the world to me.
Oh, love it. So happy to be here.
So before we get started, how about give our listeners just like a little introduction about what you do and maybe like how long you've been doing this.
Of course. Well, I've been coaching men for the last 4 years. I help them find purpose and passion again by healing subconscious trauma. So all of the crap that you don't know that's messing up your life in the current moment, you think you have a problem, but usually whatever problems you have right now are symptoms of
Right.
something much deeper. So I help men uncover that and heal it so they can have better lives.
That's awesome. So before I ask the first question on here, the last mental health advocate that I had on here that was for men, she was also a female, and she's got quite the following like yourself. And she's told me some stories on a lot of pushback she gets, and whether it's on the men's side or the women's side, I gotta ask, do you have any pushback from the community at all? Being a woman and being a men's mental health advocate. I mean,
I don't usually get any pushback unless, I think that being a men's advocate and what type of content you put out really determines the pushback that you get. My content is focusing on the trauma and the problem that is impacting men. It's not focused on blaming women.
right,
And I
right.
think that's where a lot of advocates can kind of go wrong because they're trying to get social status and views. But it really ends up biting them in the end
Yeah.
because it just creates a whole victim mentality that people want to bandwagon on. So if you ever try to break out of that, like some of my videos have definitely been victim calling. And whenever I switch it up and try to put accountability in there, that's when I get the most pushback.
Hmm.
So I've really tried to make sure my current content is really focused on taking accountability so that the pushback has to be internally reflected.
Right. And that's completely fair because I feel a lot of her content, I think the world of her
Who
too.
is it?
So her name is Shar.
Okay,
She's
I'm,
really
I'm
big
not
on
sure who that
TikTok
is.
for a little while, and then she lives in Denmark. So, there's a lot going on that
Mhm.
side of the world at the moment, unfortunately. So she had to step back. But her content was more so, like calling out women for, the treatment of men and, just the child support aspect, kind of like digging deep into, like you said, social issues. And whereas you're focusing on trying to help people with their trauma, trying to help people with their current
Right.
situations. Um, it's interesting to hear a different perspective on that because I feel like that's all I see on the men's mental health side is we're gonna point the fingers at everybody else and women did this and society did that. And I talked about this earlier today, and it kind of it's a little frustrating to me because I do feel like there is a play in society of trying to normalize absent fathers, trying to normalize just the not a nuclear family. I went to Walmart just to go grocery shopping, and I was just sitting there thinking to myself, every time a holiday comes around, whether it's Mother's Day, whether it's, Christmas, whatever it is, all the displays are up front. All of, cards, gifts, whatever. Father's Day is not there. So I definitely feel it's interesting to call that out, but also at the same time, like you said, not point fingers at, oh, it's your fault this is happening kind of thing.
Yeah, because I think that when we heal the trauma, the social issues will also be healed. Because whether we like it or not, there is a lot of fatherless families.
Yeah.
How do we fix fatherless families if we don't fix the fathers?
Right.
And the only way you can quote unquote fix a father is to make him feel like he's capable of being a man worthy of being a father.
Right.
Because men will bail out of being a father when they don't feel capable. Any man that feels capable is not going to bail out on being a father. And some men are unfortunately pushed out of fatherhood because of very toxic women. But even in that case, we have to take accountability of like what attracted me to this woman in the first place, and how can I prevent it, and how can I not let this destroy me and make me into a bitter man that is now going
Mhm.
out into society and wreaking havoc, because men are very powerful. Their energy is very powerful. So if they let their pain destroy them, they become destructive.
Yeah, and I feel that's completely fair because, you know, there are some situations where the fathers are being chased out by the mothers, but also at the same time, like you said, accountability in every aspect of our life, whether it's healing, whether it's being a parent, whether it's being a sibling, is so important to um, better ourselves as human beings. And I feel so much of the society just lacks accountability. And I think that's a really great call out, especially in a world that just wants to victim blame or just wants to point fingers at everybody else instead of looking themselves in the mirror, you know? And for me, I know the hardest part of my journey when I started going to therapy was looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, hey, you need to help yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you. And while it got really hard because I was doing a lot of it on my own, I had two people quite literally save my life and speak life into my existence. And if we can't stand together, it's always going to be divisive. It's always going to be like this, and hold each other accountable for all the nonsense and blaming that society seems to love to do. Um, so the first question I had for you was, what made you want to become a men's mental health advocate and or coach?
Well, I started wanting to be a coach because I was just trying to solve my own problems. I had hit a point at like 25 where I kept repeating the same patterns in my life. And I was like, okay, there's obviously something I cannot see that I keep repeating. Let me get therapy. So I did therapy. It made me feel better. But about a year and a half in, I was thinking, I'm still repeating some of these patterns. Like, this can't be it. This can't be the healed version of myself. This can't be the end all be all, because I'm not completely there. So I took neuroscience classes, relationship classes, trauma therapy classes, and really started to understand how the brain works. And wow, that there's actually a formula for solving trauma and healing pain, and you don't have to take 10 years to do it. So I started posting these videos on LinkedIn, and that's when only men reached out to me for help. So originally I was trying to be a woman's coach, but only men reached out to me for help. And I was really weirded out. I was like, how am I going to help them?
Right.
But I was like, how am I going to help you? You're like twice my age, so much more successful. Obviously, some of that self-doubt came in, but I said to myself, Elise, you started doing this because you said you could heal pain. So why don't you just give it a try? It shouldn't be different. So once I started having calls, I realized that, it does work. And I realized that men just don't have as much support as women. Every woman had, you could find a support group for anything for a woman, but men had like nothing and no one. So at that point, I just said, you know what? I'm just going to be an advocate for men. I'm going to study their problems, their issues, and the solutions for them.
Right.
And I've been doing it ever since. That was 4 years ago.
I love that. And to piggyback off of the, men not having the support groups and just like being encouraged to reach out. I mean, I try to make it a point to mention this every single time on the podcast is, we look at the suicide numbers of men and they're astronomical, and they're reaching age groups of 10 years old to older men. And, I remember when that story came out about that 10-year-old kid a couple weeks ago. And my first thought, and I said it to my therapist, I said, my first thought was, it's going to take all of us men to be gone before people start hearing us. Is that a dark thought? Sure. But it's honestly the reality of how hard it is as a man, not saying that women don't struggle, but how hard it is as a man just to talk about our issues. And every time we are vulnerable, not every time, sometimes when we're vulnerable with specific people, where that pain is used against us, that we're shamed in public for crying as men, for showing that we have emotions. And we're making progress. I'm not going to say society hasn't made a progress, but I feel conversations like this are super important, especially for a man and a woman, because I feel as a man sometimes it's super uncomfortable to talk about my feelings. And I've been in therapy for almost 4 years. So, I mean, I've made a lot of progress, but it's still hard to talk with specific people because I grew up in a very toxic environment. And I just wish as a society we could stop like the divisiveness, stop with the arguing over if I say the words men's mental health matters too, people flip out over the word too. And it confuses me because I remember a story on TikTok. A guy was talking about his unalive attempt and that he survived. And he's like, I'm thankful every single day that I didn't go through, well, that I didn't, pass away. And I said, "Oh, thank you so much for sharing your story. Men's mental health matters too." And every comment on there was so hateful. And it's just like, I don't understand you guys. Like, why is it a problem to say that our mental health matters too? And I think that's, again, that's society trying to normalize the hate for men. I don't know why that is. I don't know if you see that for yourself, but I feel like that's a perspective that I see.
Yeah, I definitely think in the last few years, men's mental health has gotten a lot more attention. I see so many more coaches for men, so many more female advocates for men. So I think it's definitely getting better. But I think the divisiveness has grown. And I think one thing that we don't want to run into, and this is something I feel very strongly about women as well. I didn't have very present parents growing up. So I never grew up with the mentality of be afraid to go in the parking lot, or, you should be afraid because you're a woman. The identity of what women should fear or be afraid of was never placed upon me. So I grew up without that. And so I think about what society is projecting in our minds and going too far. And I think for a long time, society projected in women's minds to be afraid of men, that, they didn't need a man. And I hesitate to really jump into the theory that men should be super vulnerable and their lives are so hard, because I fear that they will start adopting that as my life is so hard, I can't live with this. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
100%. Yeah.
And I think that we need to stop ingraining ourselves with these thoughts that society makes us weak, or that we're weak in society's eyes, or we can't do something. And I think that the solution is more oriented around, like you said, this matters, and leaning towards the positive side of the results of that, like encouraging each other, loving each other. Finding somewhere to blame is just bypassing the work that we need to do to actually heal. If
Agreed.
you're somebody who goes in the comment section, just rips on someone else, like you're just bypassing your own reflective work. Because even I, a men's mental health coach with X amount YZ of followers, will comment on a post in a very neutral way. But because I'm a woman and it's a men's post, people will twist it. And it's all men just dragging me.
Right.
And I will have said something so neutral. And so I'm non-reactive to it, but it really baffles me, because I'm like, if you watched my content, you would probably really resonate with it.
Right.
Right. But because you have this perspective of women and you want to make them the villain, you go out into the world with this. And so I think that's what a lot of women do to men. And sorry, I know that was a tangent, but
No,
that's
it's
kind of
fine.
what I see.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you diving into that because I think it's important to I want this to be as organic and as raw as possible, because I feel if you stick to any kind of format on any kind of interview, it's great to get answers, but I'd rather it not be robotic, if that makes sense. So I mean, I genuinely appreciate your perspective on what you've experienced and seen, because I've commented on certain mental health videos and just be like, this is why men don't speak out. It's a super negative video about men, and your algorithm is based on what you comment and like on. So I mean, you get caught in that rabbit hole. But I've seen some interviews that are just disgusting, and it's just like, this is why society is the way that it is right now, because one, social media feeds into that negativity. There's positive there, sure, but you're not going to find very much of it because the negative outweighs what is on social media. Now, we can control that algorithm and what we see, but you're still going to come across that negative video that infuriates you. There's, especially on TikTok, I had to step away from TikTok because I remember talking to my therapist about this. Ran into an interview where this guy was on the street talking to a couple women about college level, and you're like, oh, do we need men? I'm like, oh no, we don't need men, f them, they're not important. And it was just the same response in different versions, and my therapist had to drill into my head, those videos are literally made for reactions, they're not made for reality, because you're not going to walk down the street and run into people like that. It just doesn't happen. And I had to try and like make myself understand that, because it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense that you put it that way, because I've never run into people that are that hateful in real life, like, ever. And you know, I feel it's so important to call out content creators like that sometimes too, because it's like, you're doing this on purpose. Why are you
Mhm.
creating that division between us? And I don't know if you've run into like creators that are like big enough to the point where they'll respond to you to a point, but they won't like work with you on like mental health stuff. Like, I've had conversations with content creators that have, quite the following. And I'm like, hey man, like, I know you have a following and I don't want to tamper with it or whatever, because I know for some reason these bigger accounts don't like to work with smaller accounts like myself. And I said, but I would love to interview you. And I got a response from somebody who had quite the following. I'm like, hey man, your story really inspired me. I'd love to have you on the podcast to talk about it more. We started talking about it a little bit, and then just all of a sudden stops responding. Just starts leaving me on scene. Like, just say no. Like, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Just say no if you don't want to talk. But anyway, I was going on a tangent myself. um, but yeah, I do appreciate your perspective on that. You had something on your account that I wanted to ask about, and it's the Better Man membership. Could you tell our listeners like what that entails?
Yeah, of course. So the Better Man membership is a platform I created for men where it's a men's group essentially for men to feel better so they can do better and be better for themselves, for their families, and their communities. Essentially creating strong leaders from the inside out. And the mission is to help them feel better within themselves so that they can go out and change the world. We're
Right.
creating mentors, we're creating leaders. So it's just a group that we have every Sunday. We get together and we have a WhatsApp chat.
Oh,
Um,
cool. Okay,
yeah.
so it's when did you start that? Did you start that around the same time you became a coach?
No, probably just about a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I became a coach, I just focused on one-on-one coaching and just dialing that in and getting that really deep. And then I just opened the men's group last year.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. But
How
I want to
many?
touch, I
Go
was going
ahead.
to say, I want to touch on what you were talking about creators, if we could go back to that
Mhm.
for a second.
Absolutely.
Um, so definitely when you're first starting off, it's harder to get bigger creators on board because they have a specific niche, they have a specific agenda that they're trying to do. And usually like people collaborate with similar followings and similar niches. So I don't know how many followers you have. I didn't even look. I just usually say yes to kind of every podcast
Mhm.
because I know what it's like to start growing. Um, but along the lines of the responsibility of large creators, I think at a certain point you can get caught up in the views and wanting to live up to what your audience wants to see instead of living up to the truth and the mission.
Mm.
And so I've seen a couple creators post things that I did not agree with that were quite divisive. And I called them out in the comment section. And they're, another female advocate for men, but just taking like a podcast clip and putting it way out of context and making that your mission. When if you watch the whole podcast, like, because she made it seem like the wife didn't appreciate the husband when actually the whole thing was about the husband and how they were celebrating him. So I just thought that it was really like, it's just untruthful. It's just dishonest. I
Hmm.
think it's dishonest to put something in a perspective to make people feel a certain way, to
Right.
engage in a certain way, to create divisiveness, to create hate. Like, what is the actual mission? How is that actually helping anybody?
Right.
What are, what is stirring up these made up traumatic feelings going to actually do for society? So I think it's very important to remain responsible as a content creator, to be a person of truth, to be a person of honesty and good heart, because even if you grow slower, you're going to grow in deeper connection with the mission and with your
Right.
people. Anybody who's just there for the divisiveness is going to, they will turn against you in a second.
Right.
I saw this the second that I brought up some accountability and I was putting out that content that was more victim minded. They all turned against me. So it's not, you're not gaining any loyalty, you're not gaining any actual. So put your ego to the side, and that's something that makes me go off a little bit, because
Yeah.
people are not truthful.
Right. And that's a really good point. And I didn't think about the not wanting to speak like the truth, and just talking about what's actually important versus their niche audience, like you said. Um, I've had people say, "Oh, well, why don't you put money into like marketing your stuff?" Like, I think I'm in 17 countries now, and that was organic. That wasn't marketing. And it's like, I'm proud of the fact that I'm at where I'm at in 2 years, and it's been all organically, but it's so hard to have honest conversations with, people if they're not, nobody's listening or nobody's watching. And it's like, oh, why don't you dump money into marketing? I said, one, I don't want to buy my followers. I don't want to essentially have a following where 50% of them might not be genuine people, or 50% of them genuinely don't care. And I've talked to some creators that are pretty big. I think the biggest one I had was Shar. And
How
a
many
lot of, I
followers does she have?
think she has about 1 million.
Okay.
Um and
I'll have to
her
check her stuff
content,
out.
one of my one of my really good friends that listened to it, they were kind of just like, wow, this is really outside of your wheel well, because the conversations we had were pretty, I don't want to say, let's call it for what it is. It was a little divisive because she's very strong, opinionated, and I did a good job at trying to like veer it away from getting aggressive in those opinions. Um, but it's like one of the hardest interviews I've ever had to like fully conduct, because one, it was 2 hours and I wasn't expecting it to be that long. And then secondly, when we started talking about the controversial topics, I was just like, oh shit, this happened. And when when she started talking about it, I'm like, I'm gonna get a lot for this. Like I already know it's coming. And the day before I released the episode, I was having a panic attack about it, because I'm like, people are gonna stop listening to my podcast after this, and nobody's gonna want to listen anymore. I did my best in the interview, and I think only two people out of like the 60 listeners had an issue with what she said in that specific conversation, which wasn't bad. But um, I told her, I said, I know it's gonna get a lot of shit. And I know you mean it from the bottom of your heart, because she's gone through a lot too. And she's witnessed her husband go through a lot. And it was just one of those things where when you run into these big creators, and very rarely do you run into people who are 100% honest. She was open with everything.
Mhm.
And we talked about it when she was doing a TikTok live on some of the stuff that she covered. And I remember saying in her comments, I'm like, I just hope I'm not going to get canceled for what you said. And she's like,
Mhm.
I'm not worried about it. Like, it is what it is. You speak your truth, and that's the most important part of what we do. If you're not honest, why are you doing this? You know, and in the last 2 years that I've done this, I think the whole first 6 months I was doing the podcast, I was doing it on my own, and just trying to, talk about important mental health topics, and just kind of like reading research stuff and adding my story in there. I'm like, okay, so I need to switch it up and start bringing in people, because, obviously face to face encounters, or, virtual for what most of my interviews have been. Um, it's good to get another perspective on things that you think may be true, or the perspective you think you have, until for example, hearing your perspective on the blaming conversation that we had when we first recorded. um yeah, sorry for the rant. um but so for that better man membership, how many followers would you say are in, in that group? Like, would you say a lot from whenever you first brought it up or brought it in?
No, it's a very intimate group. It's like a
Hmm.
couple hundred people in there. And the people who show up live are even less.
Right.
But it's basically the ones who have been in it since the beginning. So
Hmm.
there's an article called "A Thousand True Fans."
Hmm.
And these are the men who are like ride or die for the journey. So right when I launched it, they joined, and they've kind of been with me. And I haven't really been advertising it because I really try to just focus on content creation and doing as many things for free as possible. That is just a more intimate setting where people can get more knowledge, and I invite other creators to come in on Sundays. But now now that it's going to be about a year, we're going to have affiliates within the group who they're going to become the mentors within the group, and it's going to be like a buddy system. So I'm expecting it to grow into a more massive thing within the next year.
I love that. On Facebook, I created a mental health group. I think we're almost at 1,800. And one of the very first things we did with that group was kind of like a battle buddy type thing, where, you lean on one person out of the group and, talk about the things you're going through. And then we'll have like a check-in at the end of the month to see how everything's going, see if you guys did anything together to get through whatever trials you were going through. And for a while, it was going really good. And I feel like it being a private group kind of made it a little bit of a struggle, because there are a lot of personal stories that are shared in there. And I thought about making it public a couple times again, just to try and get more followers and everything, but I was just like, there's way too many stories that are posted in there. I don't want any, like, the public to see and use against people. So so the second question I had for you is, why do you feel that men have such a hard time expressing that they're struggling from your perspective?
Because they grow up in a society that feels emotions make someone weak, and men have been known to be the stability and backbone of society. So if they show emotion, they feel that there's a weak stability in society. What we're missing and not understanding is that when you actually reject your emotion, all you're doing is repressing it and shoving it down, and then you become a slave to it. You're no longer in control. So the more we repress our emotions, the more out of control we become, which is why I think we've seen such an increase in the instability and the suicide, because there's just too much bottled up.
You mentioned the stability and the backbone of society, and I love the perspective of, men are the protectors, because you can take that in so many different ways, right? You can say they're the protectors of the family, the protectors of their siblings and everything else. But you can also spin it and say, they can be the protectors of their inner child. They can be the protector of their boundaries. And I feel, as a man, you can still hone in on that protector role and that provider role, but also do both of those things for yourself too. And whether that's accountability, whether that's setting boundaries for yourself. I feel, growing up, I had a very narcissistic mother, and anytime I would express any pain, anytime I express anything I was going through, she would use against me and turn it into harmful, uh whatever she would say to me. And both of my parents were around, but my dad was emotionally unavailable, because he grew up in that generation of rub dirt in it and be a man, and you're not, other people have it worse, or whatever he had said to me. And it's just kind of like, it's been weird. When I started therapy, I just kind of like, okay, I don't know where this is going to go, because is it going to help me? Am I going to be able to share with my therapist of what's going on? Because society says that I'm this and that if I share my emotions with people, and now I have no problem telling my story. I have no problem with sharing my vulnerable and emotional self to people, but I can also still be that provider and still be that protector that I need to be. Um, and I feel that it's really hard for men to admit that they're going through a hard time because they don't want to be viewed as a weak man. We have to be the protectors. We have to be, the masculine strong man. But, for some reason, we still can't have open conversations like this and say, hey man, I'm not doing okay. I've seen grown men, cry in front of me that I didn't think in a million years would ever see cry. When my brother passed away, um, we did a remembrance podcast of him, and one of my best friends did the podcast with me. And I think the first time within 10, 15 years that I knew him, I saw him cry. And this is a guy who bottles down everything. And I'm like, wow, man, like I appreciate you being vulnerable because it's not easy being vulnerable with people. And we're not encouraged to be vulnerable with anybody. So I definitely agree that it's definitely a societal issue when it comes to men talking about anything they're going through. Um, so you had created a video about men, that will end the stop fighting a relationship when is the only one putting in the effort. So which leads me to ask you a question. Do you feel a relationship is 50-50 or 100-100? Because I've heard this answered so many different ways, and I really want to hear your thoughts on that.
I think everybody, when they ask these questions, they always want like a black and white answer. I think each person has to give 100-100. However, no two people's 100-100 is ever going to be the same.
Right.
So I think this is where people get caught up
Hmm.
because they think that they're giving 100 and it's so much more than the other person. And they're like, that person's not trying as much. They're not doing as much. And the other person's like, dude, I'm doing all that I can. And they're giving their 100, but it's not enough.
Right.
So I think at the same time, that question doesn't even matter
Hmm.
because when we're asking that, it's because we feel some sort of lack or the fact that we're overgiving.
Right.
And so the true question is, what part of this relationship is not fulfilling and meeting my needs that I feel like it's missing to the point where I feel like they're not even trying? Because that's what's most important is like, are my needs being met?
Hmm.
Are my needs being met? And if no, it doesn't even matter what percentage they're giving. You
Right.
don't measure your relationship in percentages. You measure it on, are we aligned? Are our needs being met on a consistent basis? If they're not being met on a consistent basis, outside of a hard time, somebody's child dies or parent dies or they've gotten cancer, the relationships are going to have waves. But if it doesn't meet your needs, then it's just not in alignment. It doesn't matter the percentage of effort anyone's giving.
Right. Yeah, the couple different ways that I've heard uh people respond to that as well. The one that sticks out to me the most is, some days I'll be feeling 2% and my partner will, hold the rest of that percentage just to, make sure that the other one's okay. So I find it interesting that you answered it the way that you did, because again, I kind of feel like it's in the same conversation as that ridiculous how would you rate me 1 to 10 kind of thing. It's like
Yeah.
um the percentage thing or the scale thing or whatever. I definitely feel is something that for some reason people put in their heads, like this is how relationships need to be.
That's
And
because many people are codependent and they're
yeah,
relying on the other person to complete them or fill in their missing gaps.
right.
The way that I am speaking about it is you're always self-reflecting and measuring how you show up in the relationship. And
Hmm.
you're also measuring what you're receiving in the relationship. So you're not trying to control someone else. You're not trying to get them to fill in the gaps. You're not trying to get them to change. You're assessing, am I giving enough? Am I giving my all? And am I receiving what I need? Because if not, like that's the only accurate measurement you can have, because you will never ever know precisely exactly how that other person is feeling, what they're doing, what they're giving, what they're receiving. You can only measure yourself. Healthy people are not worrying about the effort that the other person gives. They're worrying about the impact it's having on themselves.
That's completely fair. So, okay, uh, to piggyback off of that leads me to another question. At what point do you step away because you feel that person is not giving that effort?
You step away the second you feel like your needs aren't being met. Right. And step away, like, let's reframe what step away means. If you're meaning like completely leave the relationship,
Yeah,
right? So first you have to address within yourself, okay, what needs of mine aren't being met? And are they actually needs, or are they just desires?
right.
Because sometimes what we see as a need is actually just a desire coming from a wound, right? I need them to do this because I feel abandoned, or I feel unloved, or I don't have enough attention. And that's an inner child wound you need to do. If you've never done any work before, you have all of these things, you need to get therapy.
Yeah,
Like, get therapy, get a coach, figure these things out, because or else you might quit on good people because
yeah,
you're too demanding or you don't have boundaries, etc. So then you bring it up to the other person. Hey, what's going on in your world? I'm noticing that things are different, something's missing, etc. And that's when you're giving your 100%, because giving your 100% means showing up for your partner and understanding their perspective without assuming that you know. So you inquire with your partner, you see what's going on. Once you bring it to their attention, if it's a healthy relationship, usually they can make changes or work with you or explain so that your nervous system is regulated and you guys feel in alignment again.
right.
If you have continued to bring up the situations to them, you've continued to try to change your own perspective or your own behavior, and you keep asking, why aren't things different? I keep trying. Why aren't they trying? You know that you're just spinning in circles. That's a time to step away.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a time to say, this person is not willing
right.
to be in alignment with me or give the effort that I need.
Mhm,
And I continue to find myself overgiving
right.
and feeling undernourished.
Mhm,
So I need to step away from my own sanity.
right. So I guess in internally that would be like a self boundary in a sense,
Yeah.
a self boundary, self worth kind of thing. And one of the most important parts that you mentioned there, I feel like, is communication. Communication and accountability. Again, go back to that wonderful word, accountability. Um, Communication, I feel, is I should be at the very, very top of the list in any relationship with anybody, whether it's intimate or whether it's anybody else. And people can't change if you're not communicating. What's either A, bothering you, or B, hey, I don't like this certain thing that you're doing. Not asking you to change your being, but like, I feel this is a very harmful to our relationship that, you do this. And instead of saying, I want you to change, maybe improve on that, or express what you feel is hurting your relationship. Because if you're not talking, why are you in the relationship? And I'll never understand why people do that. It's like, I grew up from a broken family. My parents divorced when I was very young. And, the only thing my mom did for 20 years is trash my dad. And I saw it on both sides. My dad didn't do it as much, and I witnessed my mom do it. But, she is just one of those people who lacks accountability in its entirety. And unfortunately, they grew up in that generation of, we're not going to hold anybody accountable for their actions. They're just, oh, well, they had a rough childhood, and just wash our hands and walk away. It's like, okay, at what point do we stop blaming how our parents brought us up and you're a grown adult now? So where's the accountability come in? You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, I definitely feel communication should be the number one focus in any relationship. Um, and I'm glad you brought up inner child work, because I that was one of the other questions I had for you. How important do you feel inner child work is toward in somebody's healing journey? Because I feel when most people start healing, most people start going to therapy, they don't know what that healing journey entails. So how important would you think inner child work is?
I think it's pretty important depending on what level in the journey you're in. I think in the beginning, maybe you don't understand it and you need to understand more logistical aspects of healing. But if you have deep seated trauma, inner child works can be very important, because it's your self as a child that was wounded the most. And unfortunately, most of our trauma comes from childhood, because that's just the part of our lives where we're soaking up the information and we're learning how to interact with the world, how to receive love. And we are just subject to whoever our caregivers are. So our template of the world, the baseline is going to be at the mental health of our caregivers. So if they were not that stable, your ability to go XYZ out a ratio outside of that is very difficult without external support and much internal research.
Yeah, I
So
completely agree. Just as like a short little background without saying too much. I was 14 when I had my first attempt, and it was just a very, awful environment living with my mom and moving around a bunch and her being in a bunch of different relationships. Um, as I got older, I had a second attempt when I was 27, and that's when I started going to therapy. Um, between the ages of 14 to 27, I numbed myself to the point that I didn't even know that what I was going through wasn't normal, that I was just trying to fill that void with toxic behaviors, with not taking care of myself, with literally tearing my shoulder to shreds. Like it got to a point of nothing I was doing was healthy in any aspect whatsoever. I was self-destructing. When I went to therapy for the first time, I was 27 and I was living in Jersey. This is before I came back down here to Florida and things were as good as they are right now. Um, and I remember the first two sessions, I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't look at the therapist in the eyes of anything that I was going through. I expressed to her that my mom gave me away after my second attempt or after my first attempt. And, just it was like stepping on glass, trying to uncover all the things that my mom did and said to me, like, oh, this wasn't normal. This, her talking to me the way that she did wasn't normal. Then when I moved down to Florida, and have the therapist that I have now, I didn't know I was abused until I had those conversations with my therapist. And I don't know if you feel the same way about this, but I feel there are so many buzzwords in this community that people are just using for the sake of using. We got gaslighting, we got narcissists, we got abuse. I've never once growing up said I was abused because it was a word I heard so much. Oh, I don't remember my dad doing that. I don't remember my mom doing that. But then when I started talking about therapists, and she just kind of looks at me like dead in the eyes and says, "You were abused and you thought it was normal." And I'm like, and I asked her, I'm like, I thought abuse was XYZ. Like, there's many different forms of abuse. You were physically abused, but not like extreme cases, but you were mentally and emotionally abused. And like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Um, I feel inner child work is one of the most uh, strongest pieces of a foundation in your healing journey, because if you can address that little kid, that little boy or girl when you were younger and be like, hey, I know you went through so much, but we're gonna get through this together and I love you. There's so many layers of inner child work that I feel so many people aren't ready for. And when you start that journey and you can have conversations like this and be willing to be open with others like this, I feel you're invincible. Nothing can hurt you anymore because your inner child is so protected. And um, any relationship that you're in, you can handle because you did that inner child work and you know what unhealthy and what toxic looks like. So I love your perspective on inner child work because it's one of those things that I hold very near to my heart. It's not talked about nearly enough in this community, I feel like.
yeah, that's very powerful what you brought up about not knowing you were abused, because when we're children, we don't have anything else. So whatever we grow up with, we deem as normal. And if you grow up with abuse as being your normal, then you learn how to tolerate abusive behavior. So we end up in relationships that usually mirror those same patterns. We try not, like, everybody's like, oh, I don't want someone like my mom and dad. So they try to do the opposite, right? But you forget that you are part of your mom and dad. So you are attracting the behavior that is within them that you want the most. Because if you think about narcissism or people who are abusive, they are never showing that as their first face.
Right.
They aren't. And that's what confuses people so much, is because I just recently got out of an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's like, how did you not know? You know men, you should have been able to see the signs. Like, there's a lot of shame when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But it's like the rebuttal is, do you think if they showed up like that, that I would have been in there?
Exactly.
No, they don't, because an abuser studies human interaction and psychology to the point where they get so good at knowing how to validate people's emotional wounds and abandonment, and knowing how to spot people who have a soft spot in their heart for understanding and for toleration.
Right.
So as much as you can say that you're never going to end up with so-and-so, if you have not done enough work, or if you've never encountered those people before, it's still, you're still susceptible to fall into those traps.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah. And that's like what you said, a lot of us are living in denial. I think a lot of us grew up with, like, I come from the Midwest, a lot of people out there are alcoholics, and it's so normalized. People start drinking at the age of 15 in their barns of Bush Light, Bud Light, whatever it's called, and they're just getting drunk. And everybody thinks it's normal, but just because it's normal doesn't mean it's right.
Right.
And so I think that for men, a really good thing to understand is that just because it's normal for men to be called weak or pussies or whatever doesn't mean it's right, and doesn't mean that you should do it and follow the crowd. We don't have to live up to societal expectations, because most of society is depressed and anxious and doesn't like their lives, and they're unhappy and they're poor. So who cares if you're living up to societal expectations anyway, because you don't want to be there. You actually don't want to live up to societal standards, because they're not society as a whole is not successful.
Yeah.
So if you want to be a successful individual, you have to learn to step out and don't be afraid to be the different person in the crowd.
Right. And to add to that, to break that cycle that our parents created for us. And I feel so many people don't realize that a cycle was created for them, that, like you said, I'm not going to be with somebody that was like my mom or dad, but you end up being there because you didn't put in the work to prevent that from happening. And like you said, it's really easy to fall into that trap, because, as you and I know, narcissists love to put on that mask. They're like, oh, I would never do anything to hurt you. I love you, this, and this. And I just want to also say I'm so sorry that you had to experience that, because I've seen people in abusive relationships, and genuinely, I'm sorry you had to go through that.
Thank you.
One of my best friends, when they first met my mom, they're like, she did that all that to you? She seems like,
because they love them, right? They're so sweet. They're so amazing. They're the stars of the community. Why do you think that pastors and priests get away with molesting young children? Because they have the perfect role and perception that people associate them with goodness.
Yeah.
So it's always the people you least expect, because they put on the persona to be able to get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I remember one of my friends looking at me like I was crazy when I told her the things that she did to me. And they're like, oh, she wouldn't do that. Like, how are you going to not validate the experience that I went through and say she wouldn't do that? I'm not making this up. And that was the reason that I numbed myself for so long, because I was called crazy. I was called delusional, overly sensitive. I've heard it all. And when I started therapy, my mom really started to show her colors, because I could see the signs and see all the things that she was saying and doing, and how she was doing them. I remember taking her to the hospital for like a small procedure or something, and I told her, I'm going back home. Like, I'm going to Florida. I can't be here with you anymore. And as soon as I said that to her, I kid you not, Elise, that switch completely turned off. Like, that nice, caring, loving mom, that went completely off. Oh, you're going back to Florida? Why? So da 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 da. And the day that I left, she posted on Facebook, oh, my son Christopher is going back to Florida and leaving me and her fiance's name is Chris, funny enough, um, putting me and Chris in a financial bind. I'm like, wait a minute. When the, when did we get here? Because I said I'm leaving. I don't want to be here anymore. Like oh my god, narcissists are funny because it doesn't take much for them to show their colors, especially in public. Just takes that one little incident to the mask falls off.
Yeah, but they do it in a way that makes it seem like they're a victim.
Right.
Like
Right.
just recently when I found out about my ex's many infidelities, we were no contact for 4 months, and I broke the no contact because I was furious.
Yeah.
And so before I found out about all the infidelities, I had broken it the night before, and I was like, yo, can we talk? And when he apologized, you can see it in text, it's so funny. He goes, because I said, you know what? I forgive you, whatever, I'm letting it go. Before I found out about the depth of because the next day I reamed him out and I said, I don't forgive you. I'm going to put that on record. But I said, I forgive you, whatever. And he's like, yeah, I forgive you too for all the times that you did little things that enraged me. Just like
no.
the apology was trying to make me make me take part of the blame. Like, yeah, we both did bad things, like we both had our toxic moments. It was like, there was no actual real, and that's how when someone has not done the work, is just, it was just this big story of like, I've been going to therapy, and like, I really realized like I wanted to reach out so many times and apologize for how toxic it was. But I obviously never did, because he's lying. He's gonna lie. I don't believe a single word. Like after
God.
that, like the complete shattering. So I can't diagnose. Some people have told me he has like more like sociopath tendencies. I don't know about any of that. I'm not going to throw these words out. What he did was like very sick. I don't know the depth of what your mom did, but I've never ever encountered a person like this before in my life. Yeah. When the whole fantasy was revealed, but it's so funny when they still try to put on the facade with someone who actually sees them for who they are, and they can't like battle. They just, they're lying. They just can't battle it anymore. And then what they do is they go off on their whatever rampage they can to try to gain external like validation, right, and make you the bad guy because you're like calling them out and everybody loves them.
Yeah.
But the truth always reveals itself, man. You can't stress yourself out about the lies and stuff that people tell. If anybody's listening to this and you've encountered it, like you might get so stressed out, like, oh my God, they're shaming me in the town and talking about how bad of a person I am. The truth always comes out. Always. Like eventually people start to see like, okay, this is a little weird. Like, yeah, they're not saying like, just don't fall into the trap. Don't fight. Don't try to play in the mud better than pigs do. Right? Like that's where they live. So just let them be there. And yeah, I got heated. I went on a tangent.
Oh, it's okay. I'm glad you shared it, because the craziest part of you sharing that is I literally saw my mom. Like,
right. Anybody who can resonate resonates.
Yeah. When she went to therapy, quote unquote, I still to this day don't believe she ever went to therapy.
Right? You don't believe that.
She came back after her first session. The first thing that she says, my therapist told me to tell you guys to stop bringing up my past, and just walked out of the room. I'm like, what therapist says that? I'm a little confused.
But only one that's probably lied to. Right?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, they might go to therapy and then swindle the therapist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're so good. I don't think people understand how good at lying these people are. They've made an entire new reality where they are literally the hero. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. When I forgave her for how she's talked to me over the years and how she's treated me, she's like, oh, like you said, I forgive you for bringing up my past and da 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 da. I'm like, what? When did we get here and how?
Yeah, it's not.
It's crazy. They really are the best liars in the world. It's crazy.
I never in my life encountered someone so crazy. Like, right. So whatever, God gave me this to understand on a deeper level. But yeah, actually, and this is something good to bring up, because you experienced this with your mom and I experienced this with a partner. When this truth came out, not only did I hate this person, but I also really started hating my dad.
Yeah.
because this was the only person I had ever dated that had similar attributes to my dad. And so, as obviously they're not the same person, but I felt like as I understood this person more, my previous partner, I felt like I understood my dad more, and it just made me hate my dad.
Yeah.
Because, as a kid, you just don't ever want to feel like your parent is the villain. You
Right.
always are trying to make them the hero. They're the God
Mm-hmm.
in your eyes. So for a long time, I defended the honor of my dad, even though I knew that he did things that messed our family up. And he was so good at, he wasn't like a good parent, but he was a better parent than my mom was.
That's
So he
exactly
was
my situation, right?
he was so good at being like making me feel loved for what
Yeah.
I had available,
Right.
and covering up his tracks and being the
Mm,
hero,
mm,
with his words.
right.
And so when I found out about all these infidelities with my partner and all the terrible other things that he was doing, I was like, dude, this makes me so angry at my father, because like I just feel like our parents subject us
Mm-hmm.
to these things, and they ruin our lives in a
Right.
way, because now we have to. I'm 30 years old. Why am I just now finding out about these behaviors that I wish I didn't have to navigate?
Right.
Because what relationships could I have had? What family of my own could I have had? And now I'm stuck starting over because I got to rework this
Mm,
childhood trauma, and it's
right.
not fair. And people listening to this, you're going to feel like it's not fair. I don't recommend feeling sorry for yourself forever, but acknowledge what it is, and accept peace with the fact that you might not like your parents anymore.
Right.
That it's okay to say, dude, like, I might love my parents because they're my parents. They gave me birth, but I don't respect them as
Yeah.
people. And if I were to meet them in society, I would not like them.
Right.
They're not respectable, and I'm going to love them for what they are as my catapult into this world. But I'm going to acknowledge who they are so that I can eradicate those behaviors from my being. Because if I keep ignoring their behavior to honor them because I feel guilted into it, then I'm going to keep ignoring those behaviors within myself, and I'm going to keep subjecting myself to destructive patterns and ways of being.
So, sharing this with you is going to lead into the question, but I'll be 32 this year, and my whole adult life, I've never been in a relationship because of what I experienced. And when I say my mom has been in probably over 20 relationships when I grew up, I wish I was exaggerating. I've witnessed every behavior from her and other men that she was with that I wish as a kid I never witnessed. And I used to feel really ashamed sharing that with people because it's just like, oh, you're 32, you've never been in a relationship. That's embarrassing, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I don't think people realize how deep down that hurt goes, how far back that goes. And, my mom was the first woman to break my heart. And it's not like, not your normal heartbreak, obviously, but it's one of those things where I tiptoe. If I have an interest in my life, I tiptoe with that person because I don't, if I see a behavior that I see in my mom, it scares the shit out of me, and I walk away. And I know my worth, and I know not to settle because that's what she did. And her reasoning of settling was so she would have support, so she had a house to sleep in, and blah blah blah. When I settle, I don't want it to be with somebody that just, oh, I'm attracted to this one thing that they have, and that's it. I want it to be because I'm healthy minded enough to know this is what I'm worthy of. This is what I want out of my life. So that leads me into the question, because you brought up your father. How where is it? What would be the best advice you could offer to someone who struggles from possibly both the mother wound and the father wound?
Well, this is probably something no one's going to want to hear, but usually if you're struggling from one, you're struggling from both,
Yeah,
because unhealthy people attract unhealthy people.
right.
And, we get caught up sometimes because we might admire a parent more than the other. So we think we only have the other wound. Like, I hated my mom growing up and I loved my dad. So I only thought that I had like this mother wound. But
Mhm.
really, I have huge mother and father wound. Both of them I did.
Right.
So either way, the best way to start is by going to therapy and analyzing the behavior patterns that you're doing now, because that's how that trauma is showing up most in your life. And that's how you can reverse engineer. Okay, where did this come from? Where did this start? What do I need to acknowledge, heal, forgive?
Knowledge, heal, forgive. I like that a lot. And much like yourself, I grew up hating my mom and, not loving my dad, but just thinking he was the better parent, right? And every time my mom would throw shade at my dad, I'd be like, you don't need to say this every day in my life. Like, it's getting ridiculous. You guys have been divorced 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, where we're at 20 years now, and she still does it. And I haven't talked to her in over a year now, and now I'm starting to see all the toxic behaviors that my father has. We bashed heads a lot when I grew up because I liked the things that he didn't. I was into shows that he wasn't into, and I wasn't a big car guy like he was, and just we couldn't ever see eye to eye because he's got that partying personality and all that stuff, and I'm very introverted for the most part. And it finally came to a like probably the worst argument him and I had. He sold his house, and he said he was going to give me and my siblings some money, to get a car or whatever. So we all went out to dinner, and he was drinking a little bit, and I'm like, this is not going to be a good night. Like, I just know how he is when he drinks. So we got back to his house, and we were all talking on the couch and everything, and he's like, oh, don't go spend money on so and so. And I'm like, dude, I support myself, I pay my bills, nobody does it for me. Like, I'm very responsible with what I do. If I have hobbies outside of sitting in this damn house, leave me alone. I don't bother anybody. He takes the envelope of money and throws it at my head and says, here, just take it, I don't give a shit. And then he insults me by that I go to therapy. He's like, therapy doesn't work. Therapy is just there so you keep coming back for another session, and you're just giving them money. I remember getting so angry. It takes a lot to get me mad. I got so angry. I was in tears, clenched my jaw, and I yelled at him. I said, if it wasn't for therapy, I probably wouldn't be alive right now. And just went off on him. And my brother had to take me out of the house. He's like, dude, I haven't seen you that mad since we were kids. I'm like, I don't think people realize, like, I'm very to myself. Like, I don't bother anybody. I don't get mad at people. It's just not worth my energy. But when you get to the point of insulting what has helped me create that foundation, I don't respect him as a man. He's a giant man child. And when I expressed that to my therapist, I followed up with saying, he's the unhealed version of me. And then when I said that, my therapist just kind of dropped her jaw. She's like, that makes so much sense. I'm like, it's true. I was a pretty, bitter and, just not wanting good things for people that I didn't like, and uh was just like he is now, minus the partying part. And just seeing how he treats me now that I don't talk to my mom, it's kind of been ever since I went off on him, it's been a lot different now because I think he knows not to mess with me. But just I don't respect him as a man. To me, he's not a man. He's a giant man child. Um, so it's interesting to hear that if somebody has a mother wound, they have a father wound, especially, in the beginning of our conversation when we had mentioned that the absent father conversation is, I feel like, is a heavy one to bring up because even the single mothers who didn't grow up with that support, and that kid doesn't have a father, that wound is there, that why didn't he want to stay around for me kind of thing. So it's interesting. I've never heard that one, if you have one, you have both.
But now you're experiencing it.
Yeah, and I'm experiencing it, right.
Right, because the veil of the child is, we, like we said, we don't want to make our parents the villain. So if one is the villain, we will make the other the hero, just because they're showing us less of who they are in that moment. But yeah, that's the hard thing, is that I had a like shamanic teacher in Mexico, and we were talking about the family tree, and he asked me if I ever wanted like my own family and children, and at that time I said no, I don't want kids or any of that. He's like, well, why not? And I was like, I don't know, I just don't. He's like, well, do you think I was like, I didn't have a good family. I don't really want to like do that. He's like, do you think you're toxic? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe since it runs in my family tree. And he said, don't ever think that, because listen, you are half your mother, half your father. So every time you hate on them, it's like taking a knife and stabbing yourself. You're hating part of yourself, essentially. And so when you heal that part of yourself, then you give hope back to the family tree. And so it's really powerful when you said, he is the unhealed version of me, because I think as children, we are the unhealed, like they are the unhealed versions of us, because they give us a ceiling. Their ceiling is our floor, and we are meant to grow above them. We are meant to heal the parts that they didn't heal. And so in a way, you can forgive your parents way more when you heal yourself, because you're no longer trapped by the things you feel victimized by them.
Right.
You know, and letting go of the idea that your parents are ever going to be what you want or need them to be, and just understanding that they're actually just people. You can, a really good book for this is Adult Children of Immature Parents, of emotionally immature parents. It's really good. It helps you take them off the pedestal. But oftentimes when we're on our healing journey, we try to get our parents to understand how they treated us as children. And we don't understand that if they're not ready to have that conversation, like they haven't brought it up, all we're doing is re-traumatizing both people, because we're trying to get them to see a reality that is not existent to them. And then all we're doing is forcing them to once again invalidate us. Right. So when you yelled at your dad, it might have been really good for your inner child as the rebel, but you were yelling at him because once again, you gave him an opportunity to invalidate you and to make you feel small and to make you feel unworthy. And you said, if it weren't for therapy, I wouldn't be alive anymore, because you wanted your dad to care about you being alive.
Yeah.
Because I had the same outburst at my dad. Yeah. Almost the exact same outburst, when he just never had acknowledged what he did to ruin our lives. And one day I was just, because he was always trying to push me into toxic positivity as well. Like he could never handle an emotion. So I would be crying and I had no one. And I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to give it one last try to be vulnerable with my dad. One last try, the inner child, one last try for my dad to show up for me. Of course he didn't. He's like, stop crying. You don't have any reason to be upset. You're doing all this stuff. And I lost it. And I said, you don't understand. If I died in any of these countries, no one would even care. And he's like, how dare you say that? Of course we would care. And I was like, no one has cared about me since I was a little kid. And I just hard cried, because it was that inner child.
Yeah.
The last attempt to be seen and validated by the person who brought you into this world, and they just can't do it.
Right.
And I hung up, and you just have this hard cry that the inner child is like, fuck, they are not going to be this hero that I saw them as. They're not going to come save me. And it's so heartbreaking for you to finally realize that, no matter what age you're at. But letting go of the idea that they're going to change and that you can help them do it is so freeing. And then you can decide whether you want a relationship with them or not. And then I just said, okay, the relationship that I will have with my father, if I choose to have one, is just going to be surface level. We're going to talk about flower beds. He'll never ask me a single question. Nothing meaningful will ever come from this. My parents don't know me as a person at all. Right. They weren't there. They don't even know. It's almost like I really don't exist. Like they know what their version of me is, but there's no depth. There's nothing about it. So it sucks sometimes, but you have to be able to say, that's not going to rule my life. And I'm going to choose who I'm going to be, and I'm going to choose different relationships. And I've been so lucky and fortunate to create different families outside of them that I go to every year for Christmas. And I'm sure that you have too, right? Just like people who really matter to you.
Create your own traditions.
Yeah.
For me, we started doing a Friendsgiving thing around the pandemic time. That was around the time I started therapy. And like, hey, I just came back down to Florida. Holidays suck. So I want to create traditions. Started doing Friendsgiving. Then we started doing movies on Christmas Day. And we've kept that tradition for 5 years now. And for me, the biggest struggle with my dad has always just kind of been chasing that ghost of, like you said, validation and wanting to hear the words, I'm proud of you. Never once have I ever heard those words from him. I tried doing wrestling school in like 2016 because it was one of my biggest passions in life is wrestling. I've watched it since I was like 7 years old, and I love everything about it. I love every aspect of it. I tore my shoulder, and the muscle was really bad, and I had to get surgery. When I came back from surgery, I was sitting on the couch, still a little drowsy from the anesthesia and from the Percocet. My dad, the only thing he says when he comes in, not to say I told you so, but I told you so, and walked out, went to the bar. My brother left to his friend's house, and I had no clean laundry because it was laundry day. And trying to do laundry with one arm, with my arm in this big ass sling, and still intoxicated from the Percocet, um, led to even more toxic behaviors, and that was moving to Jersey. But again, just seeking that validation, seeking him to give a shit. And I have told my therapist it would take me passing away for them to give a shit. I could be in the gutter right now, gone, and not one of my family members would know. Um, I genuinely still feel like that sometimes. Any holiday that we have together, that we're spending dinners together, I feel like that sometimes still. Like you said, I keep everything surface level with my whole family. They don't know the real Chris. Every ounce of me that has any depth is in these podcasts, is in these conversations. Um, I've told you just in this podcast alone, a little over an hour, I've told you more than I've told both of my parents in probably the last 6 years about myself. And it sucks saying that out loud, but it's true. Um, and it's because I've created a family outside of my base family. It's because I create these connections and these conversations, because this means more to me than my actual family does, wholeheartedly. Um,
Well, I just want to thank you for being vulnerable and opening up and sharing and um, creating a safe space, because I've never talked about any of this on any of my podcasts. And I think it sucks what you've been through. But I'm also grateful that you can understand, because a lot of people do not understand what we're talking about
right.
when it comes to the family dynamic.
Yep.
Because usually they're like, well, you're not close to your family. Like, what about your mom? Like, you don't like go back home to your mom. When's the last time you went home? You don't talk to your parents. You don't call your parents. They're so confused. And for me, I'm like so non-triggered by it, because I've never been close to my parents. So I don't have an emotional reaction when they say that. But sometimes, like you, I just like literally was going on a walk one day, and I'm like, I've never had like an adult conversation with my mom or my dad. Like, I've never like sat and had a coffee with them. They've never spent quality time with me. Like, it's the most in-depth conversations I've ever had with my parents are when they've been talking about the other parent, and they're looking to me for therapeutic assistance. And that was when I was like 14.
Yeah.
So like, we're put in positions that are not normal for people. You're parentified, and a lot of our adulthood is regaining our childhood.
Yep.
A lot of our adulthood is regaining the ability to love ourselves and to understand that we can be loved, and to understand how to just function. So I don't blame you for not being in an adult relationship. I think it's good to push yourself, maybe to try and test it out, because you can never fully heal for a relationship by yourself.
Right.
But no one can judge you for being hesitant. They don't understand like what abuse does to you, to your nervous system.
Yeah.
And the fact is that we do attract those people once we've attracted them. So it's like, it's really hard to question your freaking sanity.
Right.
You start double checking everything.
Yeah. And just factoring in abandonment too. It's the wonderful ghosting that everybody loves to do. That's hurtful. Even if it's not a relationship, it's just like, oh, we had a good conversation going here, and then all of a sudden they disappeared. But that's that's a whole nother conversation. um, as an advocate for men, what do you feel is the biggest stigma that you've faced?
The biggest stigma that I've faced,
Like just as like a creator and an advocate and coach for men.
Like that men are facing now?
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm confused about the question.
Yeah. So like, have you had people just kind of like oh well, why are you an advocate for men? You're a woman, kind of thing.
Oh, I get a lot of from men that will comment on my videos. You guys are going to listen to a woman. A woman can never understand men's issues.
Right, right.
Which, like I get, but at the same time I don't get, because they're like because I also get these comments like, what if a man was coaching women, when that would never fly. But there are so many famous men's coaches for women, like Matthew Hussey, and there's like so many. So it's really kind of funny. But I want to, like, I'm not teaching men how to be men.
Right,
I'm
right.
teaching men how to heal and how to be better.
Yeah.
Like I can't teach a man how to like shave his balls. Like, listen, I don't know how to do that. I'm not your daddy. All right. I'm not Papa. I'm not trying to be Papa.
Oh my
I'm
God.
not teaching you how to change the oil in your car, right, sir? I'm teaching you how to heal your inner child. Okay. I don't need to be a man to do that, because men don't
Oh,
know how. Men don't know
oh,
how to do that. So,
that's incredible. You're awesome. Holy shit.
I mean, this is the truth.
I
Maybe I
know,
should make a
just go
reel out
from
of
like
that.
one emotion to another, just incredible. I love it.
Listen, I've got a funny side. I just don't show it that much because people I'll feel like I'll upset people. It's just a different dynamic.
More funny stuff, please. Holy crap. That was too good. Um, so I ask all my guests this towards the end of the podcast, and I'll ask you because every answer you've given, I feel like, has been just stellar. If you could change one thing in this mental health community, what would it be?
Ooh, probably the victim blaming, or
Mm,
not victim blaming. Sorry, like when just whenever people try to blame someone else for why they are the way they are.
right.
If everybody could take accountability, everything would be just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everything. And that doesn't mean you shame yourself and you just take responsibility for everything. Take responsibility for your part.
Right.
For your part.
Right.
It's no one
And
else's fault.
and I feel like that part's super important because it's, there's that gray area of, like you said, when people hear the word accountability, it's like, oh, I'm supposed to take the blame for everything now. It's all my fault. And not like what you said, like what you've done in this situation. Take accountability for that. Um, and holding people accountable too, because I feel so many people don't like to do that for whatever reason, especially in their friend
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah. Exactly. People say they don't like conflict, but really they are afraid to be abandoned
Yeah,
instead of living in truth and authenticity. When really it's just like you are self-abandoning when you abandon your authenticity.
agreed. Um, so at the end of every podcast, I like to share a quote, whether it's mental health based or on the subject or guest. Before I read mine, do you have any quotes that you live by?
I live by every day of your life should be the best day of your life.
I like
Just
that.
helps me create a new foundation every day for like positivity. It just reminds me that today is the only day that we have,
Yeah.
and if I can focus on making today the best day, well, then every day is a good day.
Right. Before my brother passed away, he used to go by saying, defeat the me of yesterday. And I had it tattooed on me for his 2 year anniversary of being gone. And it's one of those things where, you're better than you were yesterday, and feel so many people have a hard time understanding exactly what that means. So I want to read this quote that I found on Instagram the other day. It was sorry about that. Doesn't have an author that I saw on there. It was just kind of shared from another reel, but it says, "You've got to resurrect the deep pain within you and give it a place to live that's not within your body. Let it live in
Mm-hmm.
art. Let it live in writing. Let it live in music. Let it be devoured by building brighter connections. Your body is not a coffin for pain to be buried in. Put it somewhere else. Put it somewhere else." That last line, holy crap. Your body is not a coffin for pain to be buried in. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
lord. That's probably one of the heaviest quotes I think I've read in a minute. Um, so before we
So
close
good.
out, where can our followers find you?
Wow, well, that quote was really powerful. I really like that. Can you send that to me?
Absolutely.
Love that. Followers can find me anywhere. Elise Micheals, Micheals. I only have one account. I'll never DM you for readings or donations. I have to say that every time because there's a lot of spam accounts that try to copy me. But always welcome to the Better Man membership. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really, really enjoyed doing this podcast.
Yeah, it was this conversation I feel was much needed and very, 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 very powerful conversation. So thank you again for coming on. And again, thank you to your assistant Michelle for making this happen. For all my listeners, guys, thank you guys for listening as always. Thank you for the support. We just made it into Mexico, so thank you again for my supporters there. Till next time, guys, be well, and as always, be gentle with yourselves. Much love, guys.